A quick warning, this episode contains conversations about drug addiction, substance use, trauma, and domestic violence. We reference eating disorders, suicide, and use explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everyone, I'm Carmen.
I'm Jackie.
And I'm Emily, also known as Douglas.
And we're your hosts. Welcome to Generation SOS On Record, a podcast that invites people to share their uncensored stories about mental health and substance use. We invite you to open your minds and your ears and allow these stories to speak louder than statistics ever could.
I never really had someone that was going through the same
that
thing.
Musicians feel deeper.
You kind of feel like you can't tell anyone, which is like the opposite of what you should do.
Saying that I was too young to have been included in a conversation, which I kind of call bullshit on.
No, I'm just wondering because I really don't know you growing up. You said you're a year sober, which is incredible. Yeah. So what was that path like, if you don't mind sharing, going down the road of using and then addiction and then recovery?
So I had a pretty hunky-dory childhood. You kind of think the stereotypical American family. Mom stays home, dad goes to work. There's an older brother, younger daughter, 3 years apart. So basically, I remember my mom. So my mom is a type 1 diabetic. So she always put such big emphasis on working out, being healthy. So there was always even from the very beginning of early years, there was always pressure to look good and to be healthy because diabetes runs in our family. So there was always pressure. So I always remember being 5 years old and looking in the mirror, and that whole day I would obsess about what I would eat at 5 years old because I didn't want to get diabetes or I didn't want to be fat or I cared so much about how I looked at 5 years old. That's so sad to think about. Mm-hmm. And so then it kind of everything was hunky-dory, progressed, whatever. I get to 7th, 8th grade. And my parents ended up getting divorced. My mom cheated on my dad, and she's now married to the last guy that she cheated on my dad with. So that kind of my world just kind of crashed at that point because I went from thinking one day, literally in a span of a day, it wasn't my parents are kind of just fighting, whatever. Everything was always behind closed doors. So I didn't know my parents were having problems until they were literally getting divorced. We were just this normal family, I thought. And then the next, morning, the next day, whatever, my parents are not good. So my mom was really in and out that, cause this was at the end of 7th grade. So my parents were really my mom was really in and out that summer because she would take time to rest and get alone time, but she would just go cheat on my dad. And it was sad to watch, and it still makes me sad because my dad tried so hard. He tried so hard to get my mom back. You know what I mean? And so I watched that, and as a kid, I mean I wasn't a little kid, but at 12 years old, you're still a kid.
It's a pivotal time in your life.
Such a pivotal time, exactly.
Yeah. And your world that you knew changed while you're making big changes.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. And so then, that's kind of when I started getting into substances, because that's when I first remember feeling okay, something's not right. I didn't know the words mental health at that time, but I was something was just not right in my brain. And looking back, I was I was so depressed and I didn't even realize. So the mental health from when I was a little kid, that definitely started my eating disorder issues. And then the stuff with my parents, that was my first sign of serious mental health problems. And so that was my first sign of serious mental health problems. And I said earlier, we use as the solution.
Right.
It's the mental health. I bet you 99% of all people who use substances, whether they want to say they're an addict, they probably have a mental health issue.
Yeah, exactly. We were just talking about how mental health is a risk factor to using.
did not talk
So
about it.
exactly. So that's kind of when I was like, I was also going to high school in like 8th grade, and that's kind of when that's when I started like experimenting with like drugs and alcohol. And over time, like it just progressed. Like I said, like I got the drinking ticket at 14, and then after that, like it just progressed into harder things. Throughout high school, I was always kind of known as like a party girl, or like there was definitely like one too many times where I was too drunk. You know what I mean? Like drunker than everyone else.
That being your reputation, did you like that at the time? Like, did you want to fulfill that?
I didn't care. I was like, this is who I am, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so I embraced it, and then I went to so then I started dating a drug dealer. So started dating a drug dealer, and like red flag the first time I ever met him, because he was literally selling drugs the first time I met him.
Yeah.
And me thinking like, oh, like whatever, I'm like, that's hot. So I was like, okay. So him and I started dating, and we started just like smoking weed. Like we weren't doing anything hard, whatever. And then like a year and a half into the relationship, he comes over one day and he has these pills. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, they're Percocets. At the time, thought they were Percocets.
She's doing major air quote bunny. Yeah. Whatever you call them. Quote, air quotes. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue. Yeah.
So he brings them over one day, and I'm like, okay, what is that? That looks, interesting. And he's like, oh, they're Percocets, so apparently Percocets, whatever. So I do them, and that's when I was like, whoa, that was, yeah. It was like I had found all of my solutions to every problem I ever had in my life. That's what it felt like. And
wait, Piper, quick question. Does this, because I know you worked at a hair salon, did you start because your back was hurting, or no?
So at the time, I would tell myself, I was like, oh, I need them for my back.
I remember we had this conversation. So yeah. I was like, you definitely told me that at one point, would
tell myself anything to justify my using. Anything.
Mm-hmm.
So basically I wasn't like looking back, I was definitely mentally addicted, but my body hadn't caught up yet. So my body wasn't physically addicted for like years into doing them, because I would only do them with him. So like those couple of days that I wouldn't see him, just smoking weed, maybe drinking a little bit, whatever, that would get me through. I was fine. But I would do them whenever I was with him. And then I ended up going off to college for a little bit. And when I got there, it's a huge party school. And I went there to party. I wasn't going for the education, I went there to party. And I was like, that's kind of when I started getting into Xanax a little bit. I had done it, but like, that's kind of when I started getting into Xanax a little bit more, and I was drinking a lot, and it was just like such an unhealthy lifestyle I was living, Then
was that doing all that with school?
So the thing with me was I was always very productive. Okay. So like there's like the non-productive and the productive addict. So I was a productive addict. So I didn't think I had a problem, because I was going to work, getting all A's on the dean's list. Mm-hmm. Like I was getting my stuff that I needed to get done.
Functioning. And that's why you didn't want to recognize it at the time. You didn't feel like friends. Mm-hmm. And I was with a decent amount, but I was like, oh, she's going to work school, because you think when people are busy, you're staying out of trouble, kind of. Like that's what you correlate to someone's worth now.
And also, like, it progresses as well. So like I at that time I wasn't high at work or school, but it was like as soon as I got home I was high. And then when it progresses it goes past the line where you're high at work, or it starts affecting every single area of your life, that's when it's progressed somewhere that it's not okay, but So I was a very functional addict, and when I was in active addiction. So COVID hits, and I move in with him. And if you've never lived with a significant other, you pick up on each other's habits like that. And he was doing it. He was doing the pills. I was doing the pills. And it took maybe not even a month of living together where my body was physically addicted. At that point, my friends kind of knew. Sometimes I would do it with him. But at that point, I was like, okay, I'm literally addicted to these now. Nobody can know.
And what did that physical addiction feel like?
So it feels like if you don't have it, you sweat, you ache, you throw up, you have diarrhea, you're shaking, hot and cold chills.
Huh.
When I was going through it, it felt like I was gonna die. And like I literally felt like I wasn't gonna, I mean, you can die from withdrawals, but like that's how I felt without my drugs. I was like, I am gonna die.
Wow.
Like I literally felt like I couldn't be sober any second of the day. Like I couldn't bear life without being high, you know?
Right.
And so that's kind of when it took a turn, and that's when it became my secret, became my secret, and I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want my family to know, or my best friends, because that's bad. You never think you don't think that you're going to get addicted to something. You don't. And when you do, it's like, oh my God, if you didn't grow up with parents like that, or, your really good friends in your life aren't doing stuff like that, it's embarrassing almost, you kind of feel like you can't tell anyone, which is like the opposite of what you should do. Like you should reach out as much as you can, because like if only I had reached out sooner, like the course of my life probably would have been very different. I could have saved myself a lot of hurt, but at the same time, I also feel like you also need to go through what you need to go through, and everyone goes through things for a reason, So at this point, I was physically addicted. No one could know. I started working in a hair salon, and then, so basically, my ex told me one day he stopped coming home, and it was very weird. He stopped coming home, and he tells me he got another girl pregnant, and I'm like, okay, yeah.
Did you know he was cheating at the time?
Yeah, so I knew. Like, I wasn't like, I was stupid, but I wasn't like oblivious. Like, I knew he was cheating on me. It was one of those situations where it's like, just don't ask, don't tell. It was like one of those things where it's like, I just don't want to deal with that today. He could have done anything, because when you're in that mindset, you do not care. You will do whatever. Like, so I knew, and then basically I found out a couple months later that he had a whole girlfriend. And like, I don't know why I didn't see that earlier, but I was also like in psychosis. So I was so like not right in the head.
Can you explain what that is?
So psychosis is when it's like a drug induced. I'm gonna give you like the exact definition and then go off of that.
Because you taught me what it was. I didn't know.
Yeah, psychosis is a mental disorder character. You're like disconnected from reality. So like you don't see things the way normal people are seeing things. Like you think people are watching you, or like I knew he was cheating on me, but like I didn't see the whole picture. I was so just like messed up. So basically, I'm the sort of girl who is loyal to the end. I'm all in. So I stayed after finding that out because I need my drugs, And it's not like I knew other people to get these drugs from. Like, none of my friends were doing this. It was like me and him thing. And basically the last day that we lived together, so our relationship had many like domestic violence instances. So I do want to say that as well, because a lot of relationships that I was like are very similar than the one I was in. And domestic violence is a huge factor, especially when there's drug use around. So the last day we lived together, I was off of work, and I look out the window because he said he was going somewhere, and I was like, okay. So I look at the window and this girl is at our place. And I start running down the stairs. I am like, oh, hell no. This man comes. We live on the 3rd story of all wooden steps. There's no elevator. He comes, drags me by my hair, drags me up the stairs, and just starts like beating me. And I told him, I was like, if you don't get off me right now, I'm going to call the police. And so he leaves with this girl. I pack up all this stuff, and he's gone the next day. And that was like such, I always, whenever I tell my story, I always add that in there because that will be the day, like that was the last day in my life that I'll ever let a man like put his hands on me again. That was such a pivotal day in my life. Because after that is when my, like things were already going downhill, but like things were going way downhill, you know? I started using alone, couldn't even go like an hour and a half without using, or, you know, it was on my mind all the time. Like my mind, it was in my mind rent free. He knew that he got me addicted. I mean, I did it. I take full responsibility. I did it. I put it on my nose. I was doing it, but who knows if I would have done it in the first place if he didn't bring it around.
Yeah.
Or Roxy's. Roxy cotton. And like I knew they were cut with stuff. I knew because like you shave it down and in the middle it's white, and that's the fentanyl right there. And I asked my dealer one time, I was like, what is that? And he was like, oh, it's just cut with stuff. And I was like, okay. I was like, whatever. I didn't care. So the next couple months go by and like my life is just drastically going downhill. And then one day, I was hanging out with some loser guy and a different guy that was getting me drugs because he was getting me drugs. So, you know, we're going to hang out. And so so if you're not familiar, like with where I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there's a lake there called Lake Norman. And so everyone goes on the lake all the time, right? So I was going on the lake and I hadn't seen my very best friend Carmen in months. And like my body type is not supposed to be like 100 pounds. And I was 100 pounds. And I was so small. I wasn't eating. I was like twacked out of my mind. Like I don't even know what I was talking about. I don't know what I did that day. And I remember I had to get off the boat, or I remember saying, I have to leave because I have to go move. She's like, what the fuck?
So did you notice something that Piper looked noticeably different when you first saw her? Was that a reaction you had?
Just looked like pale and fragile, but also you're with this random guy, and it was just kind of weird. And I remember, and it's not funny, but I remember being on the boat and you like wanted to leave.
Yeah.
Like you were like, I need to get off right now. And we're kind of like, not freaking out about it, but you were like, get me off the stand boat. And everyone was like, okay, like we'll get you off, you know. And it hadn't been that long. And I didn't think twice about it because you were actually moving. She was moving. Mm-hmm. But so Piper gets off the boat. If you don't mind, I'm gonna say this.
No, I don't care.
Right there. But and two of our friends had been with Piper pretty frequently, and like recently up to this point, and they were like, hey, you know, we haven't told you this, but we think, you know, we've known Piper has been using X, Y, and Z, but it seems to be really bad now. And she's hanging out with this other random drug dealer kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And they were pretty much like highlight to me, like something's going on and we haven't told you. And I don't think she wants you to know this. So I don't know how you should go about this. Pretty much being like, so it's bad kind of. Mm-hmm. And then I go to, I don't know, what do you want me to say?
So basically that day, my car breaks, after I leave the boat, my car breaks down. On the way to go buy drugs with this guy. We have to get, you know, all this stuff. I didn't have a car. I was moving. I didn't have drugs. It was horrible. I was moving out. I was in the middle of moving. Carmen and I was in the bathroom with this guy doing drugs, doing fentanyl. And we hear a bang on my door, on the bathroom door. No, Carmen did not tell me one thing. She just shows up at my place with our other friend, Savannah. And she's like, do you have anything you want to tell me? And I was like, no. I don't even really remember the conversation. But
Well, I just banged on the door. I was so nervous. I was like, Piper is gonna kill me, so I'm pulling up. It was, guys, it was kind of a terrible timing. There's like movers in and out. And I walk in, I'm like, where's Piper? And they're like, the girl, like, she's in the bathroom, and I bang on the door. You and the other guy come out. I'm like, I need to speak to you outside privately. And I kind of was just like, I know you're using, blah, blah, blah. And like, I'm going to tell your family. And Piper pretty much cusses me out.
Yeah.
Like, essentially, it's just like, I will never speak to you again. I'll tell them, but like, not right now. I'm moving out.
So basically, I was like, I will never speak to you again if you tell my parents. Like, that was my mindset. I was like, my very best friend in the world, who I adore, like, I'm saying I'll never speak to again because of drugs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Change everything.
I was like, I knew as soon as my family found out that my whole life was going to change.
Your secret would be out.
Yeah, my secret was out.
Tell everybody.
I was like, this fucking girl, man.
Yeah. While I'm moving.
Yeah, while I'm moving. I'm so grateful that she did that.
But so your first reaction is anger.
Yes, I was not happy. I was not happy. Because it was like, if you think about it, like, my relationship with drugs was like a relationship. Like, I was in love with these things, you know? It was my whole world. So when someone tells me they're going to take that away from me, my first reaction was anger, you know? And then I kind of thought about it for a while. I thought about it for the rest of the day. Carmen left, and I knew I had a problem. And I was at the point in my addiction where I knew I couldn't live like this anymore.
Now, sorry, not to interrupt. When you called her brother and started planning out this intervention, did your family, like, did they have suspicions of what was going on? Like,
I think they knew something was up, right, Carmen?
And now you're alone in this apartment. You don't live with your parents anymore. You're still going to work all the time. Like, you really don't know, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think it was a point where I remember being on the phone with her brother that night, because you actually used in front of me when I stayed at your new apartment that night. And I texted your brother immediately after and was like, we have to, like, tomorrow, like, we have to do something. Yeah. And I remember calling them earlier that day, and they were like, we don't know what to do. We've never been through this before. It's just interesting. They're like, we had no idea, and we feel like terrible parents and blah, blah, blah. But at that point, it's like, well, now we know. So all was in our control is to just do something about it now, you know?
Yeah, right. But it's like, what do you do? I mean, first of all, there's not one correct answer. And second of all, like, you're not taught the option. What do you do?
You're not taught the options. That's a good point, Jackie.
Yeah, you're not. I didn't know I didn't know. Yeah. So Carmen comes over that night, and that's like the only person who saw, you know, what I needed to do to get through the day. You know, I needed to snort drugs up my nose multiple times a day to get through the day so I wouldn't get sick. And so the next day, Carmen takes me to work, and I was there for probably 2 hours. I go on my break, and that was the first time I used in my friend's car because I didn't have a car. And I used it in my friend's car, and I just remember sitting my head back and just thinking, I was like, I can't do this anymore. You know, like, I remember thinking, like, I cannot live like this anymore. And it was the first time that I prayed to God for something other than drugs. And I don't even know how long. And I sat back and I said, God, please take me out of this, you know, whatever your higher power is or my higher power is, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, you can't get through this thing without a higher power, you know, you have to. And that was the first time I actually prayed to God about my life. And I was like, dear God, I can't do this anymore. And I didn't know anything about this intervention. I had no idea. So I go back into work. 10 minutes later, my friend Ramsey's like, hey, your mom's here. I was like, why is my mom here? It's a Tuesday. She's supposed to be at work. So I go up to the front, and my mom's like, get your things. You coming with me? And I was like, oh, no. I was like, oh God. I was like, what is going on? I was like, okay. So I go grab my stuff, and she, as soon as we walk out of my work, she's like, honey, I know, and you're going to rehab. And I just started bawling, crying. I was like, I'm so sorry. And then I have a whole intervention with my family in Carmen. And that's when my life changed, you know. It really showed me when I spoke about what I was going through. It really showed me how much I was loved by the people in my life, you know. And I think that's something a lot of people don't think about, you know, like if you're out there struggling, people do love and care for you, you know, even if you don't feel like that right now. There are people out there that care, you know, regardless if you know them well or not. And that's super important, you know, because when you're in active addiction, you don't really think about that. You know, you think no one loves you, everyone's out to get you, no one wants the best for you. And it's not true, you know, because without the people in my life, I wouldn't have gone, you know, like I went to a random rehab in Malibu, California. And so I literally went on a plane in the same day and I went to rehab, and that's when my like journey of recovery started. You know, I learned about Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, the 12 steps, which is super important. How important it is to have a higher power. A lot of people think like, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, all that, like they're like cults, you know. A lot of people think they're like cults because you have to believe in Jesus, but you can believe in your higher power can be whatever the hell you want it to be, you know. And that's super important, you know, to be connected to your, you know, your recovery, because obviously like I was doing fentanyl, you know, like it wasn't me looking out for me, something bigger was looking out for me, you know. What if I had known earlier? You know, what if I had known what I was doing earlier? You know, what if I, you know, spoke on it earlier? You know, like what if and I don't like to live my life in like what ifs, but I think about other kids, other teenagers, other people who are struggling with like active addiction and don't even know it, you know?
Yeah. I think especially because when you're around people who are doing the same thing and then hiding that part of yourself from the people who aren't, it doesn't feel so abnormal. So you went to rehab in Malibu.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
how long did you stay? Was it successful the first time? Like, how did that work?
Yeah. So for me, I'm one of the lucky ones, I like to say. A lot of people don't get it their first time. And so basically I stayed in rehab detox for 21 days. And then after that, my parents really wanted me to go to sober living. And sober living, people think of it as like a halfway house, but it's not. I mean, there are halfway houses, but sober living is like, basically it's just like a college dorm, you know? It's like a college dorm, and you basically, it's just a bunch of people who are also trying to get sober. You know, you get drug tested, breathalyzed every night. They give you your meds. They get you on the right dosage of like what mental health meds that you need, if you need any. Mm-hmm. You know, they basically just like, it's rehabilitation. It just helps you recover. It's transitioning back into the real world, you know, which is a huge thing, because when you're using, you're not in the real world. You're in your own world.
Yeah. How was that living with? Because you lived with 4 other.
Yeah. So I lived in a house. Towards the end, we moved houses, and I lived in a house with 30 other women.
Wow.
It was insane, but you get used to it. It's weird. Like you kind of miss it, you know, you walk into the kitchen and someone's always there, you know.
I'm sure there's a bond, a strong
There is a strong bond, you know, because especially there's a lot of girls who are around my age, and that's a huge thing, because before I came out here, I didn't know one person my age who was sober.
I'm sure that was so, again, 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Flying across the country knowing nobody while you were at work a couple of days before using it. No, she was at work the same morning before. Exactly. We went up to her house and packed up a bunch of random stuff, threw in a suitcase, and we called. I just remember this part I wanted to add is we kept calling all these places, and you had to quarantine before. Mm-hmm. Well, an addict quarantining before rehab is extremely difficult. So we looked in like North Carolina, Tennessee, and you had to quarantine. And California was one of the only places where like, we'll take you right now. So correct me if I'm wrong, there was someone at the airport who flew with you.
No one flew with me. I was actually on the plane by myself. Oh, it was awful. I remember trying to drink to like, it just made everything worse. So
Detoxing on the plane by yourself.
And not knowing anyone. I had to connect flights in Atlanta to LA.
Wow.
And I had been crying too. So like my face was just,
It's not like it was easy to.
no, it was horrible. One of the worst flights of my life.
It sounds like you were just really committed to this.
I was like, I am so like just done with this life.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what I have to do, I'll do it. I was like, I've been doing fentanyl, you know, because you hear about it and you don't think it can do. How I literally just had a moment and I sat down and I was just like, how am I here? And the rehab technician, he was like, look, you can believe it as luck or you can believe it as a higher power, but that's a higher power because like the rate you've been doing it and the test, like how high your levels are, it's astronomical that you're still alive. It was crazy. It was a crazy moment. And that's kind of when I was like, what am I doing with my life? You know, like what am I doing? You know, like how did I get here? You know, I get into sober living and it's really hard. Like after going to rehab, like you think 30 days is a long time or 21, 30 days, whatever, 60, 90, whatever, how long your program is. You think of it as a long time, but it's really not a long time to adjust back to being a, you know, productive human in society.
Yeah.
You know, 30 days is not enough time, you know, to get your life back in order. I was not ready to go back because I knew if I were to go back after those 21 days, I would have relapsed. And sober living, I'm so grateful for it. I love living in LA. You know, it's definitely all those horrible things that I've gone through, like they all brought me to somewhere beautiful, which I think is the most important thing. Like you have to go through the hard things in life because if you don't, like you won't get to the good stuff, you know?
So what's it like now, 22, 21, having to go through all this and now being in sober living? I'm sure it helps to have people your age who are also.
It definitely helps to have people your age. And then also I've connected with people who aren't my age and people I never would have connected with beforehand. You know, I have relationships and friendships with people who I probably would have never spoken to before all of this, you know, and like I've built these amazing connections and relationships and an amazing community of people who are also have had the same struggle I've had and know what I've gone through, you know. And, you know, you get to connect with all these amazing people and like there is life after active addiction, you know, like there is things to look forward to. There are people who have gone through what you've gone through, you know, and that's so important because like a lot of people don't make it on the other side and some people just don't even try because they don't want to know what a life is without addiction, you know, but like it's beautiful, you know, like having to wake up every day and not having to use is the most freeing feeling ever.
Do you think being in LA and having that fresh environment and not, I wouldn't say have those memories there, but do you think that it was very important for your recovery to stay in LA?
Yes,
and be away
I think so, for sure. And just so everyone listening, like I did go to sober living in LA. I'm in the Valley. Like it's just so important to be somewhere that doesn't have ties to your old life.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard. But I'm grateful that I had that opportunity because so many people have children, jobs, husbands, wives, partners that they have to go back to. They don't have the choice to just pick up their life and move across the country for a fresh start. A lot of people don't have that option, you know? And I'm so grateful that I did, you know? But like, even if you are in that situation, like you do what you have to do to save your life, you know? Like you can always go back. Like now I've had enough time under my belt where I can go back home probably like for an extended period of time and I would be fine. I don't want to. I love the life.
You've started a new chapter. Just wrapping it up.
Do you forgive me?
Oh yeah, that was going to be my question.
Yes. How is your friendship?
I love Carmen to death. She's my sister.
Oh.
I love her too.
Even though she's too busy to FaceTime me.
Oh gosh. Oh, I love you so much. So yeah, thank you so much, Piper, for coming.
Yeah,
I
of
love
course.
you.
Thank you guys for having me. This was awesome. It's cool to
Yeah.
hear my story, and I hope someone got something out of it.
For more conversations like these or to find a support system near you, go to generationsos.org.